Billy was a simple man. He lived a simple life, crafting beautiful pieces of furniture in his workshop. Evenings were spent in his cozy cabin, nestled deep in the woods. The crackling fire was his companion, its warm glow chasing away the shadows. Life was quiet, predictable. He liked it that way.
I wasn't a lonely man, not really. I had the trees, the animals, and my work.
Here, in the heart of nature, he found solace, a sense of belonging he had never known before. One crisp autumn day, Billy stumbled upon a weathered leather-bound journal beneath a loose plank on the floor.
Hesitantly, I opened the journal, its musty scent filling my nostrils. The first few pages were mundane, but then the writing became erratic, filled with dread. The words ancient curse leaped out at me, sending a chill down my spine.
According to his grandfather's writings, their family was cursed by a malevolent spirit seeking retribution. The journal ended abruptly, leaving Billy with more questions than answers. He closed the book, his mind reeling. Could this be true? Was his family truly cursed? The silence of the woods became a breeding ground for fear. Whispers seemed to emanate from the rustling leaves, the creaking branches.
Sleep offered no respite. I was plagued by nightmares, vivid and terrifying.
His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. The curse, it feeds on fear, on guilt. Billy tried to ignore the whispers, to rationalize the nightmares. But the darkness was insidious, seeping into his waking hours. He started seeing things, fleeting glimpses of movement in the shadows. His own reflection seemed distorted, unfamiliar.
I tried to lose myself in my work, but the words of the journal haunted my every thought.
His once comforting sanctuary now felt like a cage.
Desperate for answers, I found myself drawn back to the attic. Each time I opened the journal, it felt like stepping closer to a precipice.
His grandfather's words painted a horrifying picture of their ancestor, Elias. Elias had been a ruthless man, driven by greed and violence. The journal hinted at dark rituals, at pacts made with sinister forces.
May God have mercy on our souls, for we are forever bound to the sins of our fathers.
Elias had been a ruthless man, a shadow cast long over their family tree. Driven by an insatiable hunger for power, he had amassed his fortune through exploitation and bloodshed.
The blood he spilled stained the very soul of our lineage.
The journal described a reckoning, a malevolent entity that would come to claim its due. The journal ended with a chilling plea.
May God have mercy on our souls.
The words hung in the air, heavy with despair. Billy slammed the journal shut, his heart pounding. The whispers returned, more insistent. That night, sleep offered no escape.
The air grew thick and cold. I felt an unseen presence in the room.
And then he saw it. A face materialized from the shadows. He forced his eyes open, his body rigid with terror. His blood ran cold as he felt a hand on his shoulder.
The curse, it lives on.
The apparition rasped, its voice a chilling whisper. The face of Elias lingered like a burn mark. Daylight brought no solace.
It spoke of my ancestors' sins, of the debt that was owed.
The townsfolk he once greeted now seemed wary. The voice began to interject into his thoughts, twisting his perceptions.
Embrace it. Become the instrument of your legacy.
It mocked his fear, his futile attempts to cling to normalcy. The voice reveled in his growing isolation. The cabin became a prison of his own making. He stopped tending to his work.
I found myself drawn to the edges of the woods.
The voice urged him to act, to give in to the base desires.
I tried to pray, but the words felt hollow.
The only response was the mocking laughter of the voice. It whispered of blood, of the intoxicating power. Billy's vision tunneled, his hands trembling with a power he didn't recognize. One night, driven by a force he could no longer control, Billy found himself at the edge of town.
The voice purred in my ear, pointing out weaknesses.
The hunger became a ravenous beast, demanding to be fed. Billy's vision tunneled, his hands trembling. He stepped into the tavern, his eyes fixed on his prey.
The voice whispered, its tone laced with anticipation.
Billy's hand shot out, connecting with the man's chest. Silence descended upon the tavern.
Sleep, once an escape, now became a torment. I saw the burly man's face, contorted in pain and surprise, his eyes pleading for a mercy I no longer possessed. The man's dying gasp echoed in my ears, a constant reminder of the monster I was becoming.
The forest, sensing his turmoil, drew closer. Branches scraped against the roof of his cabin like skeletal fingers seeking entry. The whispers grew stronger, seeping from the very walls, urging him to embrace his inheritance, to become the instrument of their vengeance.
I found myself drawn to the woods, compelled by a force I couldn't resist. The trees, once majestic guardians, now seemed to lean in, their branches intertwining overhead to form a suffocating canopy. The air grew thick and heavy, the scent of decaying leaves and damp earth clinging to me like a shroud. I stumbled upon a clearing, bathed in the cold light of the moon. A circle of ancient stones, half hidden by moss and vines, stood at its center. I recognized it from my grandfather's journal, my blood turning to ice in my veins. This was the place where Elias had performed his dark rituals, where he had bartered away our family's souls for power and wealth.
The voice pulsed with a dark energy, guiding him towards the center of the stone circle. The air crackled with unseen energy, the ground cold and unyielding beneath his feet. He felt a presence here, ancient and malevolent, watching him, waiting for him to take his place in the macabre legacy of his bloodline.
"This is where it began," the voice whispered, its tone tinged with reverence. "And this is where it will continue." My gaze fell upon a rusted sickle lying at the base of one of the stones, its blade glinting ominously in the moonlight. I felt a pull towards it, an almost magnetic attraction. As I reached for the sickle, my fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. A bone. I recoiled, my stomach churning with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. I dug through the undergrowth, unearthing more bones, fragments of skulls, and shattered ribs, the remnants of Elias's victims, offered up as sacrifices to appease a hungry darkness.
The voice chuckled, a low rumble that seemed to shake the very earth beneath his feet. "They understand," it hissed. "They know the price of defiance." Billy's hand trembled as he closed his fingers around the sickle's rough handle. It felt cold and heavy in his grasp, a conduit to a darkness he never wanted to know. Section 2. Echoes of the Past. A figure coalesced from the shadows, taking shape amidst the ancient stones. It was Elias, his ancestor, his tormentor, his reflection. He stood tall and gaunt, his features etched with the harsh lines of a life lived on the edge of a blade. His eyes, however, held a chilling familiarity, a reflection of the darkness that now consumed Billy's own.
You've done well. You've embraced the legacy.
Billy stared back at his ancestor, his heart a drumbeat against his ribs. He wanted to scream, to rage against the fate that had ensnared him, but the words died in his throat. Elias gestured towards the sickle, a grim smile twisting his lips.
The instrument of our power. It hungers as we hunger. It thirsts as we thirst.
The air crackled with energy as Elias stepped closer, his spectral form radiating a cold, oppressive aura.
Join me. Together we will claim what is rightfully ours. We will drown this world in blood and fear.
Section 3. A Choice to Make. Billy looked down at the sickle in his hand, its blade glinting under the ethereal glow emanating from the stones. He saw the blood staining its metal, not just the blood of his victims, but the blood of his family, his lineage, his very soul.
He thought of his grandfather, his kind eyes and gentle hands, his stories a mixture of cautionary tales and whispered hopes. The man he had loved, the man who had tried to shield him from the darkness that had ultimately consumed him. A flicker of defiance, weak but persistent, ignited within him. He had become a monster, it was true. He had committed acts that chilled him to the core, acts that had stained his soul, a darkness he feared would never fade. But was he destined to repeat the sins of his ancestors, to perpetuate the cycle of violence and despair?
He looked back at Elias, at the cold triumph in his eyes, and a new kind of hunger stirred within him. Not the insatiable hunger for power or the intoxicating rush of fear, but a hunger for something else. For redemption, for peace, for an end to the cycle that had haunted his family for generations. A single word escaped his lips, barely audible above the whistling wind that whipped through the trees. but it was a word that held the weight of defiance, of hope, of a choice yet to be made.
No.
Section 2. Eternal Struggle. Billy closed his eyes, drawing a deep breath. He could feel the pull of Elias's power, the seductive whisper of oblivion, promising release from the weight of his actions, from the torment of his fragmented soul. But he also felt something else, a flicker of warmth amidst the encroaching darkness. His grandfather's love, his friend's trust, the simple beauty of the life he had almost thrown away.
I will fight. I will fight for my soul, for the memory of those I have wronged, for a future free from the chains of your darkness.
Elias lunged, his spectral hand reaching for Billy's throat, his touch icy cold. Billy raised the sickle, not to attack, but to defend, the cold metal a barrier between him and his ancestors' grasping rage. The air crackled, filled with a blinding light as their wills clashed. Their destinies intertwined in a battle for dominance. The light faded, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like the very forest held its breath. Elias was gone, his spectral form dissolving into the shadows. Billy stood alone, the sickle trembling in his grasp, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had won this battle, but the war was far from over. He could still feel Elias's presence lurking at the edges of his awareness, a constant shadow whispering temptations, reminding him of the darkness that resided within. Billy knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was a fight he would carry with him for the rest of his days. A battle for his soul, waged in the silent chambers of his heart, where the legacy of his bloodline and the choices that defined him would clash in an eternal struggle. If you enjoyed this tale, please like and subscribe for more heart-pounding stories.